The sun had just risen over Oak Ridge Park, casting golden light through the trees and onto the paved jogging path that wound through the quiet, upscale neighborhood. The birds chirped a cheerful melody, and the air smelled fresh with a hint of dew. For Amara Griffin, this was her favorite time of day. Dressed in a sleek black athletic outfit with wireless earbuds snugly in place, she jogged along the path at a steady pace, her breathing rhythmic and calm. She loved these early morning runs, her chance to unwind and reflect before a busy day as the head of internal affairs for the state police. Amara's life was anything but ordinary. At 38 years old, she had climbed to one of the highest positions in law enforcement, earning respect for her fearless dedication to rooting out corruption and holding officers accountable. Her job wasn't easy. Pushing for justice often meant making enemies. But she took pride in her work and knew the change she was fighting for was worth it. Recently, she had moved into the affluent Oak Ridge Park neighborhood, not to flaunt her success but for the peace it offered. It was a place where she could breathe, away from the noise of the city. With her favorite podcast on police reform playing in her ears, Amara focused on the rhythm of her steps and let the world melt away, until the sound of a slow-moving car broke her concentration. In a police cruiser crawling along the jogging path's edge, Officer Ethan Cole gripped the steering wheel and narrowed his eyes. To him, the sight of Amara, a black woman jogging in a predominantly white neighborhood, didn't sit right. Ethan had worked the Oak Ridge beat for years, and he thought of himself as a gatekeeper for the community. Raised by a father who had been a high-ranking officer, Ethan grew up believing authority wasn't just a responsibility but a weapon to maintain order, or at least his version of it. Ethan's father had instilled in him a mindset that some people didn't belong in certain places, and Ethan had fully embraced that belief. As he watched Amara jog, his prejudice filled in the blanks. She must be up to no good, he thought. His mind concocted a scenario, a suspicious person, report he decided to investigate on his own. Without a shred of evidence, he flipped on his lights and pulled his car to a stop ahead of her. Amara slowed her pace, raising an eyebrow at the patrol car blocking her path. A slight frown crossed her face as she pulled out one earbud. This wasn't the first time she'd been unfairly stopped, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. Little did Ethan know, the woman he was about to confront wasn't just another jogger. Ethan stepped out of his patrol car, his expression hard and unwelcoming. His uniform was crisp, and his posture exuded authority, but there was a sharp edge to his demeanor. "Hey you!" he barked, pointing toward Amara as she stopped jogging. "What are you doing here?" Amara furrowed her brow, confused by the hostility in his tone. She gestured to her workout clothes and a small water bottle strapped to her waist. "I'm jogging," she said simply, her voice calm and measured. Ethan wasn't having it. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "We got a report about a suspicious person matching your description. Trespassing and possibly involved in theft. Care to explain yourself?" Amara blinked, taken aback by the blatant accusation. "Excuse me? I live around here. I jog this path every morning." But Ethan didn't listen. He folded his arms and looked her up and down with suspicion. "You got any ID on you?" he demanded. Amara sighed, already feeling her patience being tested. "I left it at home. I wasn't expecting to need it for a run." Ethan smirked, as though he'd caught her in a lie. "Convenient. So, no proof you live here? No ID? You know what that looks like, right?" By now, a few onlookers had gathered at a safe distance, whispering and filming the exchange on their phones. Amara glanced at them, realizing this was quickly escalating into a scene. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but firm. "Officer, I'm telling you the truth. I live 2 blocks from here. This is a misunderstanding." Ethan stepped closer, towering over her. "Misunderstanding? Look, lady, I don't have time for games. Either you cooperate, or we're going to have a problem." Amara's jaw tightened. She didn't want to make this worse, but she also knew her rights. "Officer, I'm going to ask you to think carefully about what you're doing," she said, her tone quiet but laced with authority. "You're making a mistake." Ethan's eyes narrowed, mistaking her warning for defiance. "Oh, is that a threat? You think you can intimidate me?" He reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Amara didn't move. Her voice dropped lower, calm but unyielding. "Officer, I'm telling you, back off. You have no idea who I am." To Ethan, her composure only fueled his anger. He grabbed her arm, attempting to twist it behind her back, but Amara moved with surprising agility, slipping out of his grip with ease. The onlookers gasped, their phones capturing every second. Ethan was stunned for a moment before his face twisted in frustration. "That's resisting arrest!" he shouted, reaching for his radio. Amara didn't flinch. She locked eyes with him, her expression calm and resolute. "No, officer. That's me reminding you that you've just crossed a line you can't uncross." Ethan's frustration boiled over as he yanked out his handcuffs. "You've resisted long enough," he growled, grabbing Amara's wrist and snapping the cuffs into place. She didn't fight back, allowing him to force her hands behind her back. The roughness of his grip made several bystanders flinch, their murmurs growing louder. "What's wrong with you, man? She didn't even do anything!" shouted a young man holding his phone, recording the scene from a few feet away. "Yeah, let her go," chimed in an older woman clutching her dog's leash. A small crowd had formed, and nearly every person had their phones out, documenting every move Ethan made. "Step back!" Ethan barked at the onlookers, his voice tinged with panic as the weight of their judgment began to press on him. His hands shook slightly, but he clenched his jaw to mask any sign of weakness. Turning back to Amara, he tightened the cuffs unnecessarily, making her wince. Amara remained calm, even as Ethan pushed her toward the patrol car. "You're making a scene," she said softly, her tone more disappointed than angry. "You made the scene." Ethan shot back, opening the back door of the car. "All you had to do was cooperate." Amara stepped into the car with an air of composure that only aggravated Ethan further. She turned her head slightly to meet his gaze. "I warned you. You'll regret this by the end of the day." Her cryptic words lingered in Ethan's mind as he slammed the car door shut. "Yeah, we'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. Radioing for backup, Ethan exaggerated the situation, his voice cracking slightly. "This is Officer Cole, Oak Ridge Park. I've detained a suspect, violent, resisted arrest. Need backup immediately." The onlookers gasped in disbelief. "Violent? She didn't do anything," one woman yelled, her voice rising over the chatter. A man in the crowd called out, "We've got it all on video. You can't lie your way out of this." But Ethan ignored them, doubling down as he waved them away. "Clear the area! This is a police matter," he shouted. Amara sat quietly in the back of the patrol car, her expression unreadable. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips, one that Ethan couldn't see but would haunt him later. She watched as he tried to manage the growing crowd, the pressure mounting with every phone pointed in his direction. As the patrol car pulled away, the onlookers continued recording, shouting after Ethan that they would post the videos online. Amara leaned back in her seat, her calm demeanor unwavering. She knew that the truth would catch up with Ethan faster than he could imagine. Back at the station, Ethan walked through the double doors with a smug sense of accomplishment. He still felt the eyes of the onlookers in Oak Ridge Park on him, their judgment lingering in his mind, but he brushed it off. He had followed procedure, at least in his eyes. Now it was time to process this suspect and move on with his day. Amara stepped out of the patrol car calmly, her wrists still cuffed but her head held high. Ethan led her into the booking area, ignoring her warnings and the curious stares of other officers. "One for trespassing and resisting arrest," he announced loudly, slapping her paperwork onto the counter. "She got a little feisty back there." Amara raised an eyebrow at his description but said nothing. She simply watched as he fumbled through the forms, his confidence radiating like a beacon. She didn't have to say much, she knew what was coming. Ethan's sense of victory was short-lived. The station's main doors burst open, and Captain Marion Blackwood stormed in. Marion was a tall, no-nonsense woman with sharp features and an air of authority that silenced the room the moment she entered. She clutched a tablet in one hand and a printout in the other, her jaw tight with anger. "Cole!" she barked, her voice echoing through the station. Ethan froze mid-sentence, his pen hovering over the paperwork. He turned to face Marion, his smirk fading the moment he saw the look on her face. Captain Blackwood," he stammered, trying to maintain his composure. "I was just processing." "Save it," Marion snapped, cutting him off. She slammed the tablet down on the counter, the screen displaying a live-streamed video of Ethan's arrest of Amara. The footage had gone viral within minutes, showing Ethan's aggressive behavior and the bystanders' protests. Marion held up the paperwork Ethan had filed. "Trespassing? Resisting arrest? Feisty?" she quoted, her voice dripping with disbelief and anger. "Do you even know who this is?" Ethan blinked, glancing nervously at Amara, who now wore a faint smile. "She said she lived in the area, but—" "She's Amara Griffin," Marion interrupted, her voice sharp. "The head of internal affairs for the State Police Department. Your boss's boss." Ethan's heart sank, his face draining of color. He turned to Amara, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form words. "I didn't know. That much is clear," Marion said, her voice icy. "You've just humiliated yourself, this station, and our entire department. You've made every mistake you possibly could in one encounter." Ethan's mind raced as the weight of his mistake crushed him. Amara stepped forward, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I told you you'd regret this by the end of the day," she said quietly, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. Marion looked at Amara, her expression softening. "We'll handle this, Ms. Griffin. Rest assured, this officer will face consequences." She shot Ethan a glare that made him shrink in place. Ethan's confidence crumbled as he realized the full extent of his actions. This wasn't just a bad day at work, this was a career-ending mistake. As the gravity of the situation set in, Marion turned to Amara. "I'll leave this in your hands," she said firmly. With a nod, Amara stepped forward, finally freed from the handcuffs by a visibly shaken officer. Amara adjusted her sleeves, her calm but commanding voice filling the room. "I want an immediate review of Officer Cole's history, every stop, every report, every complaint filed against him." Her words sent a ripple through the room, and the officers nearby exchanged nervous glances. Ethan stood frozen, unable to respond. Marion snapped her fingers at another officer. "Pull his file. Now." Within minutes, Ethan's record was laid bare on the station's computer. A disturbing pattern emerged: multiple stops of black and minority individuals for minor or fabricated infractions, an alarming number of use-of-force incidents, and even ignored warnings from supervisors. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man unfit for his badge. "Officer Ethan Cole," Amara began, her tone unwavering, "you've not only violated my rights but also betrayed the trust of this community and the integrity of the police force. This ends now." Marion stepped in, pulling the badge from Ethan's chest with one sharp motion. "You're officially stripped of your badge and authority, effective immediately. Consider yourself suspended without pay, pending further charges." The room was silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning. Ethan's face burned red as he stammered. But this isn't fair. I didn't know who she was." Amara turned to him, her expression both calm and cutting. "You didn't have to know who I was. You only needed to treat me with the respect and fairness every citizen deserves. And you failed." Meanwhile, the video of the arrest, which had already been spreading across social media, reached national news outlets. Headlines like, Racial profiling gone wrong, cop arrests head of internal affairs, and justice in action, corruption exposed, flooded the internet. The public was outraged, and calls for systemic reform grew louder with each passing hour. Amara faced the cameras outside the station later that day, standing tall with Captain Marion beside her. "This incident is not just about one bad officer," she said firmly. "It's about a culture that allows this behavior to go unchecked. That stops now. We will hold every officer accountable, starting here." The crowd cheered, their faith in change momentarily restored. Ethan, meanwhile, watched from the side, still in shock at how quickly his world had crumbled. Months later, the ripple effects of Ethan's actions were still unfolding. Amara's leadership had led to a sweeping investigation of the local police force, uncovering deeper issues of misconduct and abuse of power. Several other officers faced disciplinary action, while reforms were implemented to prevent further injustices. Amara became a national figure in the fight for police accountability. Her arrest video, while initially shocking, became a rallying cry for change. She spoke at conferences, appeared on news programs, and worked tirelessly to rebuild trust between law enforcement and communities of color. The public hailed her as a symbol of resilience and justice. Meanwhile, Ethan's life took a very different turn. After being convicted of misconduct and stripped of his certification, he struggled to find work. With no badge and a tarnished reputation, he was forced to take a job as a parking lot attendant. The once arrogant officer now spent his days handing out tickets, his pride shattered. One afternoon, as he worked under the blazing sun, Ethan noticed a TV playing inside a nearby diner. Through the window, he saw Amara standing at a podium, receiving a prestigious national award for her contributions to police reform. The audience applauded, and Amara's face lit up with a gracious smile. Ethan froze, his stomach twisting in knots. The memory of that day in Oak Ridge Park flooded back. Her calm warnings, the onlookers' protests, and his own hubris all played on a loop in his mind. His bitterness was evident as he clenched his fists, but deep down, regret began to creep in. He had no one to blame but himself. The final scene cut back to Amara, walking off the stage to a standing ovation. She shook hands with leaders and activists, her mission far from over. "Justice," she had said in her speech, "isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about creating a system where no one has to suffer injustice in the first place." Ethan turned away from the TV, his shadow stretching across the asphalt. The sound of applause faded into the distance as he returned to his monotonous job, haunted by the choices that led to his downfall. Amara, on the other hand, continued her fight for a better future, using her experience to inspire change. For her, the encounter with Ethan was not just a victory, it was a reminder that the fight for justice never truly ends.